Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the third annual Health Equity Summit. I'm Nicole Adams, a clinical associate professor at the Purdue School of Nursing. I work closely with Dr. Jerome Adams at the Health Equity Initiatives team, as well as Dr. Pavlo Vlachos at the Reagan Street Center for Healthcare Engineering. I'll be your MC for today. Before we officially get started, I want to take care of a few housekeeping things. Feel free to help yourself to coffee and refreshments this morning. We'll be removing the food around 9:30, but water and coffee will stay for the rest of the day in case you need a quick pick-me-up. We're on a tight timeline for the day with several exciting speakers joining us. With this tight timeline, there may not be opportunities for questions during our panels. There is a Mentimeter QR code on each table. If at any point you have a question, please feel free to submit a question through the QR code. Our health equity intern, Marla Winters, who's a senior in professional writing and public health and a Master's of Public Health student, will monitor the link throughout the day and ask questions on behalf of the audience. We apologize if we're unable to get to your questions, but we're very much looking forward to the packed agenda we have for you. There are 2 sets of restrooms available for use during our event. For those seated in the North Ballroom, restrooms are located just outside the doors to your left. In the South Ballroom, the restrooms will be just outside the doors where you may have entered following check-in. You go past the poster presentation area, out the doors, and the restrooms are immediately on your right. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Jerome Adams, to the stage to kick things off. Dr. Adams is the Executive Director of Health Equity Initiatives, at Purdue, and he is also a Presidential Fellow and a Distinguished Professor of Practice in the College of Pharmacy and in the Department of Public Health. He's also the former 20th U.S. Surgeon General and former State Health Commissioner for Indiana, where he led responses to Ebola, Zika, and the HIV crisis, and played a role in the legalization of syringe service programs in the state of Indiana. Dr. Adams is a licensed anesthesiologist with a master's degree in public health. Please help me welcome Dr. Jerome Adams.
Well, good morning, everyone. You all can do a little bit better than that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, fantastic. Happy Leap Day. It is going to be a fantastic day, and you all have no excuse. We created an extra day in the year for you to be here, so just relax, enjoy, have fun. I want to recognize a few people here. I want to recognize our First Lady, Kai Wei. Thank you for being here. And we'll always leave someone out, but I do want to recognize our deans who showed up today. Dean Eric Barker, Dean Willie Reed is here. Dean Bowman, are you here? Can the deans raise their hand? Just because I want people to see who they are, because today is all about collaboration. It's all about getting to know other people. Roberto, are you here? Roberto Gallardo is our director or vice president for engagement. So again, one of the entry points to our campus. Angie Abbott Extension, another entry point to our campus. So I want you to know who she is. And Dr. John Gates, are you here yet? Dr. John Gates, our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, will be here also. So thank you to all of you. Well, I'm going to introduce her in a bit. But we also have our provost and our executive vice president for research here, and you're going to be hearing from them literally in about 30 seconds. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's amazing to see many of you this morning, knowing you took time out of your busy schedules to join us for our third annual Health Equity Summit. It's amazing. 2 ballrooms are what we're taking up today. And for those of you all in the back, this is not a lecture hall. Please, 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 throughout the day, come forward, fill in, make sure you're taking advantage of the ability to be close to so many of the great partners here. And I want to express my gratitude and support to our external partners. We've got people from Chicago, we've got people from Evansville, we've got people from all over the state here. We could not be more thrilled to welcome you to our campus. I'm excited to showcase some of what we've been working on, and more excited about the incredible lineup of speakers we have here to join us. So now, let's jump right in. It's my pleasure to introduce Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Diversity, Patrick Wolf. As Purdue's Chief Academic Officer, Provost Wolf is... I know. Well, you can come on up. You can come on up. Well, you can come up while I'm talking. Provost Wolf is responsible for all academic matters, academic strategy and priorities, faculty-related matters, student academic and co-curricular affairs, and diversity and inclusion initiatives. Prior to his role as provost, he was dean of Purdue's College of Science, specializing in the mathematical foundations of data science. I want to say personally, I've been grateful for the support Provost Wolf has given me in our health equity efforts. He's even invited me out to his horse farm to really be out in the environment and understand how, again, One Health is so important to all that we do. So with that, Provost Wolf.
Yeah, thank you, Jerome, and really thank you, everyone, to each of you for being here today. Jerome and I have talked about an event like this for well over a year, and it's so satisfying to see it come to fruition. Even more than that, we're so pleased to have with us today, I think it's fair to say, two national treasures. Jerome being one of those who we managed to sort of bring into the Purdue family very closely over the past couple of years. Thank you very much. And Jerome, of course, needs no introduction, but also we're so pleased to have Dr. Francis Collins here with us today. And I was reflecting a little bit at the breakfast this morning. Already a really nice write-up in the student newspaper, some good Q&A, a great dinner last night, a good breakfast this morning, and I'm certain a fabulous keynote and some deep discussion today. So I won't delay us for too long from our schedule, but I will tell you that my own background as a statistician makes me think a lot about health equity, disparities in health outcomes, and how, as scholars and researchers, we are duty-bound to formulate hypotheses, ask questions, gather data, evaluate the evidence, and we are equally duty-bound to help inform policymakers so that good decisions can be made in the best interests of everyone, not just here, not just in the state of Indiana, but indeed across the country and across the world. So I have a very sort of personal stake and perspective on health equity, and we can all look at the data in Indiana, we can look at the data in rural communities, we can look at the data in urban environments, and there are no shortage of fascinating and important and fundamental scientific and clinical questions to ask and to help answer. And I'm just so pleased that all of you are here today to help us work on that. The last thing I'll say before I introduce our Executive Vice President for Research, Dr. Karen Plout, is that I fully expect you'll be hearing a lot more in the coming weeks and months from Purdue about health and life sciences, about One Health, as Jerome mentioned, which is to say not only human health, which we're here to talk about today, but animal health. We think about animal models for cancer, for example, where we have a number of recent sort of superstar hires. Also plant health, which is something that's near and dear to Karen's heart, as Purdue has invested heavily in that area over previous years. And you can just imagine all of the expertise at Purdue. We don't have our own human medical school. We have an animal medical school and hospital, and we have great collaborations with our partners at IU in Indianapolis. But we don't have a human medical school of our own per se, but we have enormous expertise spanning from infant nutrition all the way through to crops and agriculture, again, through to preclinical and clinical studies of cancer. We have, I think, the country's only NCI-designated cancer research institute in the basic sciences, not at a place with a medical school. And then everything, the icing on the cake is everything we're here to talk about today. How can we help get to better health outcomes across the population of Indiana and far beyond? So again, thank you so much for joining us. You'll hear more from us at Purdue in the coming weeks and months about the health and life sciences writ large, and particularly about One Health and everything we can do as a university to accelerate that as an exciting new strategic priority. So thank you very much, and I now invite Karen to the stage, although I guess Jerome's going to do it first. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much, Provost Wolf. And next, I do want to do a quick introduction of Dr. Karen Plout, who, prior to being the Executive Vice President for Research, was the Dean of Agriculture here at Purdue. And she was my entree to Purdue. She invited me to the Purdue Fish Fry down at the State Fair, where I took my boys to meet Bobby Knight because they're IU fans, and Bobby Knight refused to talk to them because he was in his I Hate IU stage, and my boys came with their IU equipment. True story, true story. And Gene Cady was there, and Gene Cady literally hit Bobby Knight on the back and said, "Bobby, talk to the damn boys." I mean, and so this is a true story. And then I was the keynote speaker at the Fish Fry a few years after that. So, Dr. Plout, I just really appreciate your support of me over the years. Dr. Karen Plout became Executive Vice President for Research at Purdue in January of 2023. Overseeing a $600 million research enterprise, she's responsible for university-wide strategic initiatives and bringing together researchers and resources across traditional academic boundaries to drive interdisciplinary discoveries with societal impact. As I mentioned, she joined Purdue in 2010 as an Associate Dean for Research for the College of Agriculture and later became Dean. She has over 100 publications and has received funding from the USDA, NIH, NSF, and this being Purdue, she also worked for NASA. So Dean Plout, or Vice President Plout?
Thanks very much for the kind introduction. Yes, Jerome and I have had some fun times together at that fish fry, and we actually had we sat down and did a discussion that day, and it was really interesting to hear Jerome's history and how important this area is to him, because health equity makes a difference. It is really critical that we, as we move forward as a society, that we start recognizing everybody should have the same opportunity for health care and health treatments. And we, on the stage, that's what we talked about agriculture and how that fits in, talked about rural communities, something near and dear to agriculture, because many of our people are in rural communities. How do we make sure everybody has that access that we need for the future? So that's one of our histories, and it's really exciting then to be on stage today to at least bring that up and say it's our research that can make a difference for the future. Yes, we don't have a medical school, a human medical school. We have a veterinary medical school, as Dr. Reed reminds me often. And that's really, really valuable because the basic biology underlying One Health, whether it's plants, animals, or humans, is the same. And it is coming together at record speed with some of the things we can do in the microbiome, certainly with gene editing technologies. All of these are going to be really important to us moving forward. So it's really exciting to come together to be able to do that and think about how we can improve the medical condition. We are at a crossroads right now. Life sciences is the future. What we can do in health and life sciences for the future will transform many of your lives, many of the lives of those you love, as long as everybody can have access to treatment. What we do here is many of those innovations that are going to make a difference, whether it's diagnostic testing, whether it's developing new pharmaceuticals that are cheaper, faster, easier to produce, whether it's gene editing, all of those things. In a school like Purdue, we have scientists who are working on those problems, and they're working with clinical samples. They're using animal models. We have the pieces to do that. When you couple that with our other assets in Indiana, yes, IU and IU School of Medicine, It really creates a robust ecosystem in the state to make a difference. And then one of the most important pieces is the CTSI, and we really want to thank them. The Clinical Translational Science Institute, funded by NIH, that's across the 3 institutions, IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame. Those kind of collaborations make a big difference. It allows us to use other people's facilities within that network, and also allows us to continue to move forward as an ecosystem to improve health and life sciences. So I really want to thank them for co-sponsoring this event. I don't want to take away from the main event, which for me is Dr. Francis Collins. And I will tell you last night at dinner, and I'm going to say it again, this is to me like going to a Taylor Swift concert. I am so excited he is here. I think we've got a just tremendous opportunity. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming today, because I think we have really a unique opportunity to come together and change the world, make a difference for health equity across the state and nation. Thank you very much.
All righty. Well, I guess if Dr. Collins is Taylor Swift, that makes me the warm-up act that you're hoping will be very quick so that you can hear Taylor Swift. I want to start off by asking, any students here? If you're a student here, can you stand up? Okay, we've got a couple of students here. Please give them a round of applause. And also, please make sure you speak to them, because they are the future. They are why we are here today, and we want to make sure we support them. Any faculty who've been here 2 years or less, can you stand up? All right, please give them a round of applause and welcome them to Purdue. Please make sure they feel comfortable and feel welcomed here. And let's see, are my slides? Here we go. That's me. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing in terms of our health equity initiatives work over the last year. I want to start off because we've got a number of people here who are not from Purdue, may not be familiar with Purdue, by telling you who we are as a university. We are 40,000 undergraduate students, 40,000. Do you know that Purdue, when we are in session, would actually be one of the 20th largest cities in the state of Indiana, based on our undergraduate and graduate populations? We are 12,000 graduate students. We are 10,000 plus faculty and staff. We are 12 colleges. And we have many different things to brag about. And again, I hate picking out one or two because you always leave someone out. But many people do not know we are one of 71 NCI-designated cancer centers, and only one of 7 in the entire country that focuses 100% of its efforts on laboratory research. So that is who we are as Purdue, and we want our outside partners to understand that we are ready to work with each and every one of you to fulfill our land-grant mission. And speaking of which, Purdue has a land-grant mission, a land-grant imperative. And land-grant universities were built to serve the public. They were built on the premise and the promise of teaching and service roles. Back in the day, a lot of most of the universities were really oriented around the liberal arts, around theoretical conversations, and it was decided that we needed universities that were committed to practical applications of science. And that's where the land-grant mission was first born. I do think it's important at a Health Equity Summit that we emphasize, and I'm looking at Dr. Hubach here, that some of the land for those land-grant universities was taken away from indigenous people. So we do need to acknowledge that. That said, we are proud to fulfill the land-grant mission here at Purdue. And part of our health equity work is recognizing those past wrongs and making sure we're righting those wrongs as we move forward. So what is health? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important we start with some common definitions. It's more than just genetics and medical care. We know that it's the social drivers of health, the conditions where people live, learn, work, play, and pray that are part of health. It's what you've heard, again, our provost and our executive vice president speak about when we are talking about the concept of One Health. It's really trying to move beyond the traditional models that are failing us here in the United States. Any of you all follow me on Twitter? I had a tweet that went viral this week. It's got 2 million plus impressions right now and growing. It's funny, my mother-in-law is out of town on vacation, and she called me up and she said, "Baby, what's going on? I see you on TV." My tweet that resonated with so many people was about our broken healthcare system here in this country. And one of the things that we are trying to do here at Purdue is create a more inclusive, a more holistic definition of health, and to make people understand that without health, we have literally nothing. None of the other priorities matter if we don't have health. And as I mentioned, healthcare is not health. We spend in this country about 90 cents on every dollar on medical services, on hospital services, on clinic services, and I am a practicing physician. I 100% believe in the importance of providing those services. However, those traditional services, that medical model that we are used to, only accounts for about 20% of your overall health. The other 80% of whether or not you're going to be healthy is determined by things that happen way outside of the hospital or the clinic. And they aren't going to be solved by giving everyone an insurance card and saying good luck. There are things like healthy behaviors. There are things like social and economic factors in your physical environment. And those are what we think about here at Purdue when we think about health. As a matter of fact, I tell folks, I got job offers all over the country. I got job offers at Indiana University, and I love Indiana University, not as much as I love Purdue, but I do love Indiana University. But I had to challenge myself not to double down on that medical model by going to the medical school. I came to Purdue because it was important to me to be able to work with people from the College of Ag, to be able to work with people from engineering who were designing our new diagnostics and our new testing products. It was important to me to be able to work with the veterinary school and to work with the Department of Public Health in order to create, again, this holistic idea of health. So, we talked about health, what it is not. What are health disparities? Well, health disparities are preventable differences of disease, injury, violence, or opportunities to achieve optimal health care that are experienced by populations that have been disadvantaged by their social or economic status, by their geographic location, and by their environment. And you heard Vice President Plout talk about rural communities. That's just one of those subpopulations where I think we at Purdue have particular expertise and a particular stake because of our tradition, because of our land-grant mission, because of our commitment to, again, veterinary sciences, agriculture, and beyond. So we talked about health disparities. What is health equity? Well, this is one definition of health equity: when everyone, regardless of race, sex, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic status, geographic location, or other societal constraints and constructs, have fair and just access, opportunity, and resources to achieve their highest potential for health. But this is the definition that I use. It's really simple. I can remember it. I don't have to rattle all that other stuff off. It's when everyone has a fair opportunity to make healthy choices and can be their happiest and healthiest version of themselves. That's what health equity is about. That's what I'm trying to do here at Purdue at its core. And no matter what anyone wants to tell you on TV, when any politician wants to say, equity is not a bad word. Equity is not a bad word. Diversity is not a bad word. Inclusion is not a bad word. Health equity is just looking at people and saying, how can we put you, whether you're from a rural community, whether you're someone from the military like this gentleman over here, whether you're someone who is aging, no matter who you are, there is something about you that in some circumstance puts you at a disadvantage relative to the average in this country. And health equity is just about acknowledging that and saying, how can we give everyone the opportunity in every circumstance to make healthy choices and be their healthiest and happiest version of themselves? And why does this matter? It matters because health inequities are a major contributor to our United States health disadvantage. What do I mean when I say the U.S. health disadvantage? When I was U.S. Surgeon General, I actually wrote a report that was the first ever of its kind. It shocked the folks at NIH. It shocked the folks at CDC because it wasn't written for a health audience, and it wasn't written in the traditional way that we write health reports. It was actually written for an economic audience, and I wrote it with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I wrote it with the UVA Darden School of Business. And it highlighted this health disadvantage, the fact that, you might not be able to read this chart, but it goes back to 1980. Since 1980, our life expectancy has been lower than the OECD average. And that difference has been growing. And if you look around 2020, we literally fell off the map in terms of differences in life expectancy. So that's not the only part of our US health disadvantage. The real kicker is we are doing worse than the OECD average on almost every health metric, and especially on life expectancy, despite the fact that we spend 2 to 3 times as much on health care than any of those countries. And so we're paying a lot into the system, that medical model, but what we're getting as a return on our investment is certainly not what we expect, what we deserve, and what will deliver an equitable society. And that is costing us. Health inequities are estimated to cost the United States $320 billion a year. You know, people are fighting in Congress over money all the time. What could we do with an extra $320 billion each and every year? Driven by racism and bias, structural flaws in the system, deep inequities in the drivers of health, things that I highlighted in my tweet this week that went viral. So, who's the team that's working on this? I want to acknowledge the great people who helped us put together this event. Our senior director, Holly Wood. Holly, great to have her here. Our project manager, Aubrey Anderson. Aubrey, are you here? Aubrey's over there. My executive assistant, Brandy. Brandy, say hello. So if you all ever want to get in touch with me, reach out to Brandy. I get up in the morning and my wife says, "What are you doing today?" And I say, "Ask Brandy." That's how I go through my day, even when I am not, even on the weekends, even when I'm on vacation. So Brandy, thank you so much for all that you do. I really appreciate it. And then our health equity intern, Marla Winters. Marla, are you around? One of the things that we want to do more of is really try to encourage and mentor and bring into our fold students. So for any of you all who have money, and I hate to pass around the hat, but we want funding to be able to help students be a part of the work that we are doing here. Folks know I never miss an opportunity to talk to students. I guest lecture in classes weekly. I think that no matter what I accomplish in my life, when I go into a class and talk to 20 or 40 or 50 students, that impact is multiplied exponentially. And so we want to make sure we are not just doing good work, but we're facilitating the next generation of people to do good work. I want to mention our faculty champions. These are just faculty members who have stepped up and have really helped lead some of our efforts in the health equity space. Dr. Haley Oliver, are you here? She had to step out. Dr. Haley Oliver is leading, helps our Food for Health efforts. And at our first Health Equity Summit, we actually called it Food is Medicine. And that's what you hear a lot. And our folks at Purdue said, no, we don't want to just focus on medicine because that is the medical care model. That is the disease-centric model. Food is more than medicine. Food can be health. Food can keep you healthy. It can prevent disease. So that's why we called it Food for Health. That's from the first Health Equity Summit. Infectious diseases, and they do more than this, but they really help us out in these areas. Dr. Randy Hubach, who is the head of public health, and Dr. Steve Steinhubel, who is with engineering. And then mental health and substance use, Dr. Nicole Adams, who's our MC for the day. We have throughout the year had monthly convenings of faculty. HEI work groups, and we've had folks from all over campus. Of course, we've had folks from health and human sciences, but ag, ed, library sciences, engineering, polytechnic, pharmacy, We've had folks who really come together in an interdisciplinary way. And again, Dr. Collins may speak on this, but that interdisciplinary nature of health is driving a lot of the funding opportunities now across the country. They don't want just one particular discipline to come forward. They want to see that you have that interdisciplinary team. And that's what we're facilitating with our work group sessions. And the ultimate goal is to shift from a medical model to a health equity model of health, where we are leaning into healthy behaviors, where we're leaning into social and economic factors, where we're leaning into changing the physical environment and the built environment, and also where we're reimagining clinical care in a more equitable way. So in 2023, we've brought many people to campus. Dr. Judy Monroe from the CDC Foundation was here at our summit last year. Dr. Rahul Gupta from the White House, the Office of National Drug Control Policy Director, came here in the fall. And of course, we have Dr. Francis Collins here today. That is bringing visibility to Purdue. That's allowing people of national stature to see what we are doing here in Indiana. And we are doing a lot of good work here in Indiana. And it's also putting us in a position to be able to bring some of those national funds back to our state, which is incredibly important. People talk about a brain drain. There's a cash drain. Everyone in Indiana pays federal taxes. And those federal taxes go to Washington, D.C., but they don't always come back to our states equitably. A lot of it goes to the East Coast and to schools that aren't on the radar screen. So what we're trying to do is help put Purdue and put Indiana on the radar screen for those federal funding opportunities. Involvement with student organizations like Project Icarus, classroom lectures, letters of support and recommendation for students and faculty working on grant applications. That may not sound like a lot to you all, but I wouldn't be where I was today if it wasn't for people like Francis Collins writing me a letter of recommendation. If it wasn't for people who really leaned in and helped mentor me at critical times. And so I am trying to be there for students and faculty, but we're also trying to position our senior faculty to help out junior faculty and students as they move forward in the health equity space. Collaborations with the Brian Lamb School of Communication, the Regan Street School for Center for Healthcare Engineering, and departments of public health to be able to serve as preceptor locations for undergraduate internships. We have a partnership with Ireland, where we're working with many of the universities there and global health initiatives. Partnership with the NBA. So I was at the All-Star game a few weeks ago. I say I met Larry Bird. I went into the green room, and Larry Bird was standing there, and I froze. It's funny because Vice President Plout talked about Dr. Collins and how she got nervous around him. I walked into the room, and I never get like this. I've met all sorts of famous people, and never get tongue-tied. And Larry Bird's standing there, and I just didn't even know what to say. But we're working on digital health initiatives with the NBA and really helping them understand how Purdue can lead in the next generation of health and wellness and performance. And again, working with local health departments and hospitals. That's really our bread and butter. And what Holly works on each and every day is making those connections so that we can leverage the might of all of the faculty and staff and students here at Purdue to move the needle on health. PBS came to campus, and we had a visible core screening talking about the Public Health Service Commission Core over the last year, sponsored by Dean Barker and the College of Pharmacy, College of Veterinary Medicine, and College of Health and Human Sciences. And we're working with Eli Lilly to promote diversity in clinical research in STEM in Indianapolis and in Lake County. And we can talk about that later, but just an amazing, amazing event we had in Lake County where we went to one of the lowest resourced communities in our entire state and taught them about clinical research. Took a mobile unit there. Helped them understand about the funding available in Indiana to help them go to school that they didn't even know was available, and ultimately helped change a state law that allows more of them to sign up for that funding. This is something we've done through collaboration with faculty and through the support of Purdue. And we're now on social media, so follow us on LinkedIn, Health Equity Initiatives. What's next? We want to continue to engage with students, student groups, and provide opportunities for volunteering, mentorship, and structured learning opportunities. If you're an external partner, we've got some great students. I don't want to belabor the point. I think we're still doing okay on time. But one of the things that frustrated me when I was state health commissioner, before I was Surgeon General, I traveled all over the state. and I would talk to people, and they'd all say, we don't have enough support, we don't have enough help, we don't have enough resources. And then I looked, and all over the state, we have universities like Purdue, like Wabash, like IU, like University of Evansville, all over the state where students and junior faculty are literally making up fake projects to complete their coursework and to get grants. There is a mismatch there that I'm trying to help us connect. We want to expand support for new hires on the campus, especially our health equity cluster hires. We want to support data collection and research to make the case for health improvement in Indiana and beyond. And I do want to say this, because it's an elephant in the room. When we talk about our legislature, when we talk about policy making, I've always said, and Dr. Collins talked about this last night to students, it's hard to make good policy if you've got bad data. And one of the things that we can absolutely do here at Purdue is make sure we're providing the best possible data so that the policymakers can make informed choices about health and about health equity moving forward. I think that's part of our land grant mission. We want to support the Indiana Health First implementation, and we've got a great new partnership with North Central Health Services that I am so very excited about. It is going to help us with that. NCHS is going to provide $1 million annually over the next 4 years for capacity building, data and evaluation support, and technical assistance. And again, any of you all who are interested in helping us with that as faculty or as community partners, please bring it on. Bring it on, because it's going to take all of us working together to change us from the 47th ranked state in terms of public health to hopefully somewhere higher in the next coming years. And I'm optimistic. I talked about the Health First funding. This was a Politico article. A red state boosted public health funding by 1,500%. We should be very happy about this. This is awesome. This is awesome, and it was at a time when most other states were cutting public health funding. We were able to do it by making the workforce case for health, the community case for health. But now, we've got to walk the talk now. They're going to give us the money. We got to make sure we're using it to move the needle, or the legislature is not going to continue to give us that money moving forward. We've got to bring in new partners and help them understand how we can improve health in Indiana. And we do that by making the economic case for public health. This isn't my words, even though I said the same things in my report. This is from the governor's office. Public health makes it easier to recruit workers, makes communities more attractive for businesses to locate to, reduces healthcare costs for businesses, and increases worker productivity. That is how we got $250 million in the state of Indiana for public health. And I say that to you all because we should never shy away from why we feel public health is important, but we also have to understand our target audience. And we've got to speak to them in ways that resonate. And what resonates, again, is the economic case for public health. So my ultimate goal is we just want to create high opportunity neighborhoods for more people so they can make better choices. I don't have time to go into this, but one thing I'm really excited about is this concept called digital health equity. I'm working with Stanford to write some articles about it, acknowledging the fact that we have a digital divide, that there's bias, that information can be misused, and so not everyone is in a position to benefit equally when we talk about AI, when we talk about all these new wearables, when we talk about all the new great things that are supposed to change our lives. Well, they're going to change some of our lives if you can afford a nice Apple Watch, if you have broadband access to be able to connect, but other folks are going to be left behind. And so we want to make sure we're thinking about this concept of digital health equity, and representation and communication are key, making sure you've got the right people at the table. So, last slide, how can you all get involved? You can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can scan the QR codes at your table to take you directly to our pages. If you're faculty, you can attend our monthly faculty support meetings. You can reach out to me or anyone on our team, our faculty champions, myself, Brandy, or Holly, because our success is only through your success. We are here to support you, whether you're a student, whether you're a faculty member, whether you're a community partner. So with that, I want to introduce Holly Wood to make some brief remarks. She's the Senior Director for Health Equity Initiatives with a joint appointment with the Regan Street Center for Healthcare Engineering. Holly also oversees our iHope project here at Purdue, which is a $10 million statewide initiative focused on improving health equity across the state of Indiana. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Holly.
Good morning. If Jerome is the warm-up act for Taylor Swift, I'm the only thing standing in between you and the concert, so I will be brief. I was not going to call out my name, but our First Lady, Kay, pointed out to me this morning that I didn't acknowledge in my introduction to Dr. Collins that my name is Hollywood. And my husband did that to me, so there we go. I started to think about yesterday the remarks, and I do want to talk about some of the great things that we've done in the state of Indiana through the I Hope work and the things we're anticipating doing with our NCHS partners and others. But more than anything, what I want to highlight today, and I think that this room speaks volumes about the importance of the partnerships that we have. You'll be seeing these wonderful individuals later today, and we wouldn't be able to make the impact and strides that we do without our community partners. Dr. Adams highlighted some of our internal partners, but I also want to shout out people like Lisa Crane, who drove from Bartholomew County in Columbus, Indiana today to be with us, who has been a champion for health equity and health in our state. Certainly we have our partners from Chicago that drove in yesterday. Many others I saw, our extension partners from Davies County joined us this morning as well. And it really, when we talk about Health First in Indiana, and you'll hear from our CTSI partners as well, it really takes all of us working to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our unique and individual communities in the state of Indiana. And we are so grateful to have partners like you all, our great partners at the State Department of Health, who we've worked with extensively, to make sure that people in our state are having the opportunity to be their healthiest selves. A couple of things that I just want to quickly highlight. We were able, through our I Hope initiatives, to provide some seed funding in 13 counties throughout the state of Indiana. And that seed funding allows people to have access to services and resources and supports that they wouldn't have otherwise. But the goal is not just to provide that funding, it's to help build the capacity to ensure that whatever we start grows. And we don't leave a community with anything but the ability to continue to make an impact with their neighbors and their partners. I won't go through all of this. I'm happy to provide my slides, but Dr. Adams highlighted that we work through education and training, providing research and data science, and community assistance and capacity building. These are just a few of the accomplishments that through the I Hope work we've been able to highlight. Dr. Adams mentioned our work in Lake County that focused on ensuring that students who weren't aware that they had the ability to access free money to have college tuition were given that opportunity, and we saw a 5-fold increase as a result of our efforts in just a very short period of time. Hi, Susan Joe, I didn't call you out, but it's good to see you here today. I was there. So more than anything, what I want to leave you with today is the work that we do here at Purdue, the work that my team does, the work that Dr. Adams' team does, the work that the Regan Streif Center does and that I'm fortunate to be a part of. If you look at what we're doing, we collect a lot of data to measure our impact and success. And if you notice in the beginning, our activities and the changes we see are the same because we spend time listening to find out what an individual community needs, what their resources are, what their strengths are, and where there are gaps where we can come and support them. And it's really important that we take that time to listen. And then we want to make sure that as we build capacity in our local communities that we value so deeply, the changes should always be higher than the efforts that we as professionals are putting into these communities, because that indicates to us that we are leaving them with sustainable opportunities and actions, and we are not coming into a community and doing anything to them, but we are doing it with them. And we are ensuring that every community is able to take whatever opportunity and support that this land-grant institution values and strives so hard to provide, and allows them to continue to use the skills and support that they have been provided. Thank you so much for your time today, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Adams.
And now Taylor Swift. No, I'm very proud to introduce Dr. Francis Collins. He is a physician geneticist noted for his landmark discoveries of disease genes and his previous leadership of the International Human Genome Project, which culminated in 2003 with the completion of a finished sequence of the Human DNA Instruction Book. This is nothing short of again, life-changing for many folks out there. Dr. Collins served as the director of the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH from 1993 to 2008, and that's when I first met him, even though he doesn't remember me back then. I was a young student who was doing summer internships and working at NIH, and was just blown away by, again, this opportunity to change the world. Dr. Collins then served as the 16th director of the National Institutes of Health, appointed by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate in 2009. In 2017, President Donald Trump asked Dr. Collins to continue to serve as the NIH director, and I don't think people appreciate how rare that is to have changeover during administrations. It shows you that there was a time when science was nonpartisan, and it shows you that a certain kind of person is necessary to be able to walk in both of those worlds. And President Joe Biden asked Dr. Collins to stay on in 2021 when he became president. For those 12 years, serving in unprecedented 3 administrations, Dr. Collins oversaw the work of the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world, spanning the spectrum from basic to clinical research. He stepped down as NIH director on December 19th, 2021. On February 2022, Dr. Collins began serving as acting science director to President Biden. And November 2022 to May 2023, he continued his White House service as special advisor to the president for special projects. He continues to serve as the White House lead for a bold new program to eliminate hepatitis C in the United States. Dr. Collins is an elected member of both the National Academies of Medicine and Sciences, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in November 2007. He received the National Medal of Science in 2009. In 2020, he was elected as a foreign member of the Royal Society of the UK and was also named the 50th winner of the Templeton Prize. For those of you not familiar with the Templeton Prize, that's the one prize you get before you get the Nobel Prize. And it celebrates scientific and spiritual curiosity. And it's not on his official bio that we got, but he is a great musician. And I've heard him play several times, and the most important thing for me that you should know from his bio is he's been a dear, dear friend to me and to my wife. So, Dr. Collins, please, come on up. Well, I am really looking forward to this. Make sure you're sending in questions via the QR codes, because Dr. Collins does want to take some questions. But I have my first question, but I'm going to start off completely differently. We're going to do an audible, because this morning, when you were talking with some faculty, you told a story about your greatest failure. I just talked about all of your successes. I'd love for you to start off just by telling us that story about failure.
Well, yeah, I guess Taylor Swift has failed sometimes too. That was the biggest buildup I think I've ever had. I'm a little intimidated by being up here right now. So yeah, let me further demonstrate just how non-Taylor-like I am. I did tell this story. I thought it was an important one maybe for students to hear who are always worrying that something they're doing is not necessarily going to turn out well. And when it doesn't turn out well, which certainly happens, this is science, then one can feel really defeated, and it's sort of hard to figure out what does that say about you. It's hard to separate the failure of your experiment from the failure of yourself, but you need to separate those things. And I might say, well, I'll tell the story about my postdoc experience. I had the same failures early in my career as an assistant professor. Once I finally got to that point, I didn't publish a single paper for the first 3 years as a tenure-track investigator at the University of Michigan, and believe me, I was pretty terrified about the way that was going. So yeah, the story of what happened, I have a PhD, but it's not in life science, it's in physical chemistry. And then I switched and went to medical school and got really excited about the digital aspect of medicine, which of course is DNA, and decided I wanted to be a medical geneticist. And in order to have any credentials, I needed to basically find a way to get deeply immersed in molecular biology research at the bench and learn how that went, with zero experience and never having done any research in life science. So I ended up as a postdoc at Yale in the laboratory of Sherman Weissman, who is both the most intelligent, most creative person I ever have known and continues to be highly productive today, but also one of the worst communicators. So it was a little hard figuring out what I was supposed to do, and I didn't know what to do when it came to experiments because it was all so unfamiliar. Just simple things like how do you run the autoclave was just unfamiliar territory. So I got off to kind of a rough start. I got assigned a project which I thought was really exciting and potentially groundbreaking, to develop a cloning vector that would allow you to purify human fragments of DNA as big as 15 or 20 kilobases. And at that point, people were just cloning much smaller pieces. And this was like going to be a vector that everybody will want to use, and I'll be famous. It took several months for me to actually get anything to work because I didn't know what I was doing. But ultimately, it began to sort of fall together, and there came that moment after a couple of preliminary experiments looked promising where I did the big experiment. I made a library in this cloning vector, which was a version of the lambda bacteriophage, and I was sure I was going to have this remarkable outcome with essentially the whole genome now arrayed in this collection of phage clones. And when the day came and I began to actually look to see what I had there, most of them looked exactly like each other, because it turned out there was a really serious problem about recombination that was happening that I could not possibly get around. So this was like this huge, deflating disaster of a circumstance. I'd already been a postdoc for 6 months. The clock was ticking, and there was really nothing salvageable from this in terms of a publishable result or a useful vector. It was like doomed. Hopelessly doomed, the strategy. And if I had really understood bacterial recombination, I might have known that, but I didn't. So I was sure this was like the indication that I wasn't cut out for this. I will tell you an even more embarrassing story of sitting in the men's room in the stall crying because I just thought this is the end of my dream of being a molecular biologist, and I can't let anybody see this. And finally, I went to my mentor and told him about it, figuring that he would say, well, I guess you're really not cut out for this. There's the door. And instead he said, well, you know, those things happen. Let's talk about your next project. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I went to the department chair, Lee Rosenberg, just a legendary figure in medical genetics. It was the reason I'd gone to Yale, so that I could work in his department. And he wasn't at all rattled by this and proceeded to tell me about his own first experiment as a postdoc and how it had utterly failed and how he had learned so much from that and had made him a better scientist. Well, okay, that's nice for him, but I wasn't ready to go there. I went to talk to my pastor, who happened to be a former NASA engineer, who was quite good at finding biblical verses to remind you about the difference between quitters and people who kind of stick with it. There's plenty of there to guide you as well. And I began to realize this is part of the process. This is not the end. This is sort of the beginning of your real career as a scientist, is to fail. And to fail in a way that you learn something from and you pick yourself up. And when you talk to other scientists who have made successful steps forward, almost all of them have stories like this, and now I have mine, and I'm telling it to all of you so that if there's a circumstance you find where something like this hits you, it's okay. It means you are working on something that was really hard. If your experiments work every time, then I'm sorry, you're not working on anything very interesting because the stuff that we all want to do is out there on the bleeding edge of the possible, and that means sometimes it is not going to work. But what you do want to do is to learn from it. And I learned from that experience that never again will I start a project without really doing my homework. It is not a good thing to just say, oh, I hope it'll turn out all right. If you're doing a scientific experiment, you want to know every possible way it could go wrong and prepare for that. And you better have every control, and you better think about in a long, drawn-out process, where are the go, no-go positions where you can check and see whether something is actually just not doomed to succeed. All of that I've carried with me to this day. So very generous introduction of the wonderful things I've had the chance to be involved in that worked, but I think the ones that I maybe have learned the most from are the ones that didn't. And that's just the way it ought to be. That's how science is. That's how medicine is.
So we started off comparing you to Taylor Swift. Michael Jordan talks about how he has lost thousands of games and missed dozens of game-winning shots over his career, but that failure made him stronger and made him ready for the moment. And I have to tell you that I like your version of the story better than Michael Jordan. So you spent 12 years as director of NIH. Tell us what that position actually entails, because what you all don't understand is most of my time as health commissioner and as Surgeon General, I spent explaining to people what I didn't do. Everyone had this idea that I did all these things, that I didn't sit in an office next to the President of the United States and do his annual physical exam. That wasn't what the Surgeon General does. I didn't sit in a room and sign cigarette boxes and say, with an X all day long. What does the NIH director actually do? And again, what are you proud of from your tenure?
You didn't sign those cigarette boxes? Oh, no. Well, it's an incredibly challenging job because while you are officially the person appointed by the president to oversee, as you said in the introduction, the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world, in the neighborhood of $55 billion every year, and it's your responsibility to be sure that taxpayer money is being spent in the way that is going to make the greatest advantage happen. You're also in the midst of an organization that every person who evaluates organizational structure would say is hopelessly complicated. There are 27 institutes and centers at the NIH, every one of those led by a visionary scientist who's the director. And the budget is assigned by the Congress to those institutes and centers, not to the director. So you don't really have the ability to move funds around except by cajoling those 27 folks to work together, and maybe sometimes to run a project that they weren't planning to just because it is so compelling. So a lot of your job then is to sort of look across the whole landscape, not limited by, oh, I'm thinking about cancer, or I'm thinking about diabetes. You're thinking about all of it and trying to identify something that could happen but isn't quite happening because of the way in which the organization is structured, and then try to convince everybody else to see that potential. And that's a lot of fun, because that means you really have the chance when you see something like that to try to build the momentum. And because you also have the chance to inspire the public by talking about it, and sometimes get Congress interested in it by talking to them, or the president. During Obama's presidency, Barack Obama loved science. He loved talking about science. Some of the experiences I had just one-on-one with him in the Oval Office talking about a dream about a project were just absolutely astounding because of how quick his mind was and how he was always thinking not about what you just said, but what it might mean 5 or 10 years from now. And as a result of that kind of enthusiasm, some pretty interesting things got started. The Brain
Did you have
Initiative.
conversations with Donald Trump like that?
Not
I'm
exactly.
sorry, I had to. I'm sorry, I had to. Hey,
Those were a little-
3 different presidents. This man has seen a lot.
Yeah, those were different. Yeah, with Obama, we got to start the Brain Initiative, which is now in its 8th year, trying to understand how those 86 billion neurons between your ears do what they do, not one at a time, but in circuits. This is like one of those really historic enterprises to try to understand the most complicated structure in the known universe, which you are all carrying around in your heads right now. But our brains may not be complicated enough to understand our brains without a lot of help from things like AI. And that's what's now happening with a lot of engineering engaged in that as well, in robotics. We got to start this All of Us project, which is now enrolling on the way to 1 million Americans highly diverse. More than half of them are racial and ethnic minorities, and it's also heavily reached out to rural communities, people lower socioeconomic status. This is the most diverse cohort that's ever been assembled, and all of the participants agreed that their electronic health records can be part of the effort, anonymized, of course, and their whole genomes are being sequenced. And there's a big bunch of papers about this in just the last couple of weeks. So that's pretty revolutionary, and clearly Obama got it about why that could be such an amazing platform for understanding not just disease, but health. We are the National Institutes of Health, not the National Institutes of Disease, despite what some people seem to think. So those kinds of things, as the NIH director, you can get some momentum going, get other people excited about it, figure out how to get Congress to support it. I will say the Congress part is really critical, and I don't know that I knew that when I came to Washington 30 years ago, that it's fine to talk about some great potential medical research initiative, but if Congress is not willing to kind of be enthusiastic about the enterprise, it's really hard to start new things because everybody is already pretty squeezed. And if you're going to start something new, it really helps if your budget is on the upswing and not flat or going down. So I spent a lot of time trying to build those relationships, and I will say, if you ever do anything in the government, don't underestimate how critical the relationships are. I'm sure Jerome would agree with that. And so I probably, in the course of 12 years, had at least 1,000 face-to-face meetings with a member of Congress. I got to know pretty much all the senators and a lot of the people in the House. And almost all of those, except one or two, and I won't say who they were with, went pretty well. In fact, went really well, because people are interested in this, and they care about medicine, and they want to know about health issues for themselves and their families and their constituents. And if you bring them a story about something that has recently been discovered, they'll get so excited about it. They're barraged every day by all these special interests that want something that may or may not be justified. And now here's something that has actual intrinsic value. Medical research, science, has intrinsic value. You don't have to try to come up with some fancy lobbying speech to explain it. What you do need to do is to make it understandable, and scientists don't always do a great job of that, and that's something really to work on if you have the opportunity to do that. Jerome is masterful at that in terms of taking a complicated medical situation and put it in terms that everybody can understand, and that is a skill that I think we should all try to build in ourselves as much as we can. So anyway, it's sort of a long answer, but all of the things that I've mentioned and many more are sort of part of being the NIH director, and trying to also be the spokesperson to the public when you're asked to be, and also trying to be a leader for 46,000 people who work for you so that they'll have a sense that they're cared about too. In that regard, my wife Diane really became part of my vision of leadership. So we really tried to convey to every one of those 46,000 people that they're not just there as cogs in a machine. They're not just there for what they can do to help with a project. They're there because we care about them. And this is not a faceless government institution. This is a family. And that really, I think, was an important part of the morale issues, which I think were actually remarkably strong in the course of an awful lot of stresses. I'm glad to see here at Purdue, you have that same circumstance of a president and a first lady, I'm looking at you, who make this clearly an institution that cares about people and about families and about individuals, and not just, okay, how many dollars in grant funding and how many papers did you publish? It's about who we are as human beings.
Thank you so much for that answer. We gave Barack Obama some props. It's an election year. We don't want to get in trouble. So let's talk about something that happened under the prior administration, positive, something that both you and I really do believe is one of the greatest public health and scientific achievements of our lifetimes, and that's Operation Warp Speed. Can you talk a little bit about Operation Warp Speed? And I'd love for you to dig a little bit into the involvement you and I had involving diversity in clinical trials.
Yeah, so I'll interview you a little bit too on this one. So it's January 2020. I think a lot of us have kind of maybe suppressed what the next couple of months after that were like, but it was pretty clear shortly after we knew the sequence of this virus that this was going to be a really serious threat to the whole world. The first case in the US at the end of January, and then by March and April, those horrible pictures of trucks pulling up outside the morgues to try to find a place to put all the people who are dying from this worst epidemic in more than a century. And the best hope that we all had for trying to figure out a way to keep this from absolutely decimating the world even more so was to develop a vaccine. Within 48 hours after the sequence was placed on the internet, the Vaccine Research Center at NIH had already designed the mRNA vaccine, which became the Moderna vaccine. Within 63 days, the first patient was being injected in that phase 1 trial. Those are astounding numbers in terms of speed, 5 or 10 times faster than had ever been done before. And the mRNA technology allowed that kind of thing in ways that would have been really tough if you had to actually have the virus growing in the lab or you had to purify some protein product. So the technology helped. And let's be clear, that was not invented overnight. There have been 25 years of research to get us to the point where mRNA was poised for this moment. And certainly Barney Graham and Kizzmekia Corbett, working in that Vaccine Research Center, jumped on this with the full experience that was needed to do it right, with some very clever and important modifications of the protein that made it even more immunogenic and made the vaccine even more successful. So it was looking promising, but vaccines usually fail. And even the ones that work, usually you don't get more than maybe 50 or 60% efficacy, and oftentimes there's surprising side effects. So this was clearly not going to be a done deal. So what were we going to do here in this emergency to try to do everything possible to basically hedge your bets and not have all of this on one platform and provide the resources to make it go really fast? And that's where Operation Warp Speed came along. And Jerome and I were both part of the White House COVID response team, but there was a separate conversation going on about how to speed this up. And the person I point to, who I think really deserves the credit for saying we need to do this in a way that's never been done before, and here's how, was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. Alex, who had experience from pharmaceutical company, Lilly, knew exactly how this sort of thing gets done, although he's not a scientist. And he started talking about it as a Manhattan Project, and it had that same sort of feel of that's what we need to do. He even said we should have a war room. We actually set one up, but we never quite used it. And he convinced, I think, some of the other skeptics that this was something that needed to be elevated to the secretarial level, so there was cabinet involvement. He convinced everybody the Department of Defense needed to be engaged, and I was initially not quite clear about that, and it became crucial for a lot of the logistic support that we otherwise would not have had. And he convinced, or along with some other people, convinced Moncef Slaoui to come and lead the effort, who had recently been in pharma and knew how to make a vaccine, and who worked for $1 to basically come and try to organize this. And I think there was not necessarily enormous consensus about whether this was the right plan at first, but it was brilliant. And I think from the White House perspective, the president was in favor. I think Jared Kushner had a lot to do with the White House connection and being in the position of being able to keep the president briefed on what was happening so that it could go forward. It spent a lot of money. And then there were decisions that had to be made, like in record time. You were on those calls where there would be a decision about a couple $2 billion. And the Moncef would make a proposal about what he thought was right, and there would be some discussion, and then we would all say, okay, like that. It was the right thing to do, but it was pretty darned unprecedented. Where did Warp Speed come from? Not everybody thinks that was a great name, by the way, but that was Peter Marks who came up with that. Peter Marks, who's now at the FDA, leading the gene therapy part of FDA, and who was a very creative fellow. And he said, well, we want to do what's never been done before. Let's pull this out of the science fiction arena, and we'll call it Operation Warp Speed. And it stuck. And then we had to explain.
Well, and what's fascinating about that is you talked a little bit, you made a comment earlier about communication. We're scientists, we're doctors. We're trying to get a vaccine in record time. You know, folks aren't thinking about well, how is this going to play out if we're actually successful and we've got a skeptical public with politicians saying, they went way too fast. Well, warp speed is never going to work in that scenario. No one was thinking about that. And it again shows the importance of having a holistic approach to health and having everyone at the table throughout the process so you see your blind spots.
So the program was going forward. I had the chance to pull together a collaborative partnership with no less than 20 pharmaceutical companies, all the ones that had a role here, and something called ACTIVE, which was the Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines, ACTIV. And that group, who worked 100 hours a week, flat out, 7 days, I mean, it was just incredibly intense with various working groups, quickly designed the master protocol of what the vaccine trials would have to look like. We were not going to cut corners here. This had to be randomized, double-blind, controlled, with enough participants that you could be sure of the answer when it came down to efficacy and safety. And all of the companies agreed to that. And then there also had to be an effort to begin to look for therapeutics. Were there drugs, for instance, that were already out there for some other purpose that could be repurposed for this? And we ultimately found 5 or 6 of those. But the vaccines was the big focus. And here's where Jerome and I ended up spending a fair amount of time together in the course of the summer of 2020. The phase 2 trials seemed like maybe that was a step you didn't really need to do. You know, the usual way, you do the phase 1 trial with volunteers and you see if there's some, bad safety signal. Well, there wasn't. And there was even indication of antibodies. And then normally you go to a phase 2 trial, which is maybe 300 or 400 people, and then you wait and see what the results of that are, and maybe you tweak things, and then you start the phase 3, oftentimes a year later. We didn't have time for that. So basically, phase 2 and phase 3 got smushed together in this master protocol where you would start assuming you were going to go to a big trial and have all the logistics ready, but you'd have a no-go spot if it looked like something was not going well in the first few hundred, and then you would kill the trial there. So you got the result, but you didn't have the big gap in between. And so all of this was getting set up, and the agreement was there had to be 30,000 participants in each trial. Half of them would get the actual vaccine, half would get a dummy saline shot, and they wouldn't know which one they got, and the people administering it wouldn't know. Everything was all coded. And then you would follow them for enough time to see whether, in fact, it was protecting them against infection when the virus was certainly running all over the country at that point. And it wasn't just the mRNA vaccines. There were also 2 adenovirus vaccines that were being invested in, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. And then there were 2 protein subunit vaccines, which took a lot longer to get going, one of which never quite did, and one of which now, Novavax, is available, but was technically a lot tougher. So all of those trials had to be thought about. And the big thing that really I don't think was getting enough attention, and Jerome helped a lot with raising the flag here, was if you're going to run these trials, the participants have to look like the country. The default for running a really rapid trial is going to be a lot of well-educated, high socioeconomic status white people. Probably maybe younger than the group we were most interested in protecting, which was going to be the elderly. That was just not going to cut it. And so as the phase 3 trial started to get started in late July, and we began to get the first reports back about who is signing up, it looked really bad. It was, 3 or 4%. African Americans, 2%, Hispanics. This is going to be the kind of most unfortunate, embarrassing, unconvincing outcome for the people who are perhaps initially going to be the most skeptical about whether this is good for them or not. So what to do? Tony Fauci was very much also concerned about this. I talked to Tony, talked to Jerome, and we said, okay, we got to call these companies on the carpet, even though they're working incredibly hard. And then began a series of Saturday mornings that I will never forget. It was pretty much every Saturday morning, starting in late July and stretching because there were 6 different protocols here, and they were all trying to set up their recruitment. And they would show us what they had done, and we would talk about what might need to be done to make this more diverse. And I think we were pretty clear that this was not a nice to have, this was an essential to have. If you end up, company X, with a trial that doesn't have really significant diversity, we are not going to call that a success. Because you will not find that people are willing to roll up their sleeves.
And I don't think you all understand how unprecedented this was. We've been talking the talk about diversity in clinical trials for 30 years. When I came to Indianapolis 25 years ago, I worked for Eli Lilly and was given the role of helping them increase diversity in their clinical trials. You know, and you kind of do your best and we tried, but you keep on moving forward. We're now to a place where the FDA is requiring diversity plans and saying that if your trial participants don't look like society, we are not going to approve your drug. There's now accountability. And I truly believe that a lot of that came because of the success that we saw during Operation Warp Speed. Another quick point I want to make about crisis leadership is oftentimes, when you're a leader, no matter what you do, somebody's going to get hurt. And this was a tremendous ethical challenge we had. Over the course of 2020, an average of about 750 people died every day from COVID, an average. So we were faced with, do we slow down these studies to increase diversity in the clinical trials, knowing that if we don't, the people who most need the vaccines won't accept them, but also realizing that if we do that, every day we slow down this trial, we are actually risking 750 more people dying. That is a no-win situation, and it's really tough when you're in those situations to say what is the right thing to do, but we strongly believed that there's no point in doing this if the people who most need the opportunity to get vaccinated aren't going to be able to trust it. Again, going back to health equity.
Yeah, that was a very tough part of the discussion. I think ultimately we ended up in a pretty good place because by making this as the absolutely required priority for the companies, they did figure out some very creative ways with some encouragement to do this. CVS got involved in a really useful way where if somebody went to CVS to get a test and the test was negative, then they were given a little information sheet saying, you don't have it now, but by the way, we're now testing a vaccine that might be able to protect you in the future. Are you interested in being part of the trial? And a very diverse group goes to CVS to get their testing at that point. And that got a big boost, which that's a lesson we should learn from for all future trials. In fact, we learned several lessons like that. And so there was a big push in the last month or so to greatly increase the number of enrollees. And you could also look across the country and say which centers are really doing well at this and which ones just haven't gotten it yet or just can't figure out. And so let's put more of the resources into the centers that seem to have access to diverse participants. And ultimately, if it slowed down the ultimate answer, even by a couple of days, I'm surprised because we were able to do this at the big push at the end, and all the people who had enrolled at the beginning had a longer period of time to get exposed to the virus, so we got a lot of data out of that. I will not forget the night that they unblinded the data. It was the Pfizer trial was the first one. It was like a week ahead of Moderna. And we were all just not at all sure what to expect. Again, like I said, most vaccines fail. And they took off the labels and the data team looked at it. And Tony Fauci and I had bets about this in terms of what would the answer be for efficacy. And I was betting, well, maybe 60%. And he thought, well, I'm going to bet for 70. It was 95%. 95%. And in that size of a trial of 30,000 people, half of whom actually got the vaccine, there was no worrisome safety signal. Ultimately, we learned there are even rarer events like myocarditis, and 1 out of 10,000, fortunately, all reversible. But in that original trial, there was no sign of a safety consideration. That was just this moment of realizing it worked. I was supposed to speak, and I couldn't. I got too choked up. It was just this realization that science had maybe achieved the most significant thing in all of human history when faced with a challenge of this magnitude, and with this team that had come together in unprecedented ways under great stress, managed to pull it off. And I thought, okay, we're going to make it through. And because Warp Speed had already arranged for these vaccines to be manufactured in fairly significant doses on the hopes that they would work, there was not then going to be a year long of waiting for the manufacturing to happen at scale. So that sort of late November felt like we're going to be okay. And we were okay. And then after a while, by the summer of 2021, we realized we weren't okay with 50 million people who didn't want this vaccine. And we might have to talk about that too. But let's linger for a moment on the triumph. I do think when historians look back at this achievement, they will have to marvel at what was accomplished at a time of great threat to humanity by a group of highly dedicated people who decided not to care at all about who got the credit or what legal arrangements should have been made between public and private sectors. Like, no, we're just going to do this.
It was very much and again, not being political here, it was a very business-like mindset. It was spend however much money, don't worry about we never compromised on safety, but don't worry about, the legal and regulatory burdens in terms of finance. Just get it done, and it truly was amazing. So, Marla,
I was just going to say, and for the Moderna trial, where we spent a lot of our time trying to convince them about the diversity, 37% of the trial participants were racial and ethnic minorities. 37%.
That's truly amazing. Truly amazing. And again, it set the stage for where we are now, because for 30 years, people have been, kind of giving it lip service and saying, we tried our best. We got up to 6%. Yeah. We showed that you really could get from single digits to above 30% with a concerted effort. And I think it's going to change clinical research for as long as we can imagine. Marla, how are we doing on questions? I just want to make sure we're getting teed up. But I do want to ask you, Dr. Collins, as you all get the questions ready, Marla, what are you working on now? Because you're working on a pretty exciting project right now for the White House, right?
I am, and I'm glad to talk about that here in Indiana, because I think this is something that could be absolutely transformative for the whole country if we can get it going. This is a disease that is killing 15,000 people every year, for which we have a cure, and the cure is not getting to the people who need it. It's a disease that killed my brother-in-law. This is hepatitis C. So this is a viral hepatitis that attacks the liver, and over the course of long periods of time, 10, 15, 20 years, gradually results in fibrosis, and then cirrhosis, and then liver failure, and liver cancer at a very high risk. By the way, it also induces diabetes and kidney disease. And all of this should not be happening anymore, because for the last 8 years, we have had an FDA-approved, almost miraculous medical advance, which is 1 pill a day, 12 weeks, 98% cure. Phenomenal. And I'm not saying then you have to take it the rest of your life. No, you're done. You are cured. The virus is gone. You have what we call SVR, a sustained virologic remission. And that almost never happens. And yet this came out of, initially, so I might say, some NIH-funded research at Emory, which then got picked up in the private sector and optimized and benefited by a lot of smart people. And Gilead first announced their version of this 8 years ago, and AbbVie a couple years later. So they're two companies with essentially equivalent therapeutics. But there are 2.5 million people in the United States, at least, who are currently actively infected with this virus and who are not getting access to the cure for a lot of complicated reasons that I'll mention. How do you get this disease? This comes from contaminated blood. There are baby boomers who are infected, many of whom got it from a blood transfusion before we knew how to screen for hepatitis C. We now know how to do that, so your blood transfusion is safe, but it wasn't back then. And the millennials, which is the fastest growing group with hepatitis C, are likely to have gotten this from a tattoo needle that wasn't clean or intravenous drug use. In fact, if you go to some of the opioid treatment centers where people are getting themselves free of opioid addiction and you do testing there's one in Kentucky I just talked to, 70% of the people in that opioid treatment center are Hep C positive. And there
In our
they are.
Scott County HIV outbreak, we were 90+% hepatitis C positive for people we were testing for HIV.
Wow. If you go to the prison system, because of the interaction between the drug problems and the incarceration problems, many prisons have 40% of their inmates that are Hep C positive, and nothing is mostly being done about that. So what's the problem here? If we have a cure, why isn't it getting to people? It's several things. The cost of the drug, which is still under patent, is really high. It started at $90,000 for a 12-week course, one pill a day. It's now down to $24,000, but that's still way outside the range that many state Medicaid programs can afford. So a lot of these patients are on Medicaid or they're uninsured, and there's all kinds of motivations of the healthcare system not to discover that they have it, because then they aren't going to be able to pay for the cost.
And I want to just jump in really quickly here, because I was the pharmacy and therapeutics chair at Eskenazi Health when these drugs came onto the market. And so it came to me to decide whether or not we were going to provide these medications to people at Eskenazi, which is the hospital that serves marginalized communities and marginalized people, under-resourced people around the state. And I just want you all to understand, it's one thing to say, you need to do this. I had a limited budget, and it literally would have bankrupted us if we had decided to pay for everyone to get this medication. And again, when I talk about hurting someone to help someone else, every person I treated for hepatitis C was dozens, sometimes hundreds of other people who I couldn't give a treatment for their mental health issues, for their vaccinations or something else. So you have to understand there's always a trade-off here, and it's not just as easy as saying, well, you're wrong or you're immoral if you don't cover these medications as a healthcare provider or as an insurer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But this is a health equity issue, if there ever was one. The people who need this are not the folks who have gold-plated third-party insurance. They are people who've had rough times, and yet they're our family too. So what to do about this? First of all, it is an indication about just how short-sighted our healthcare system is, that we haven't figured out how to solve this. An economist at Harvard, Jag Chatwal, basically did the math about how much in 10 years it costs the federal government if we don't find these 2.5 million people and cure them. They're going to end up with liver failure. They're going to end up with all kinds of complications. They're going to end up with needing a liver transplant, which costs an awful lot of money. They're going to end up with liver cancer, which requires treatments that usually don't work but cost a lot of money. He estimates $18 billion will be spent in the next 10 years on just caring for the people if we don't find them and cure them. We have a program sponsored by President Biden, which is out there for consideration by the Congress right now, which for a cost of about $7 billion will in fact find and cure pretty much all of those people that we can find by basically making the drug free for anybody on Medicaid, anybody who's uninsured, anybody in the prison system, anybody in the Native American reservation, which is another place where hepatitis C is very frequent. By basically adopting a new model called the subscription model, where the federal government pays a lump sum to Gilead and or AbbVie. They have to bid and say what they think it would work, and they seem very interested. And then once they've got that lump sum, they make the drugs available at no cost for that group that I just mentioned. It helps that the cost of actually making the drug is really cheap.
How cheap?
I think it's about $6 for a 12-week course is what it actually costs you to make this stuff. So they're going to do okay with this lump sum, because right now they're not making money much to speak of on these populations. So everybody wins, but we have to do it. The other part of this that's going to help, which we're pretty far along with, and I got to mention because I know there's a big effort here on diagnostics, is to come up with a better diagnostic test. Because right now it takes 3 visits to the clinic before you actually find out that you need the cure. This ought to be one of those things where you have a finger stick and you have an answer in less than an hour, and if it's positive, here's your bottle of pills. We will have that by the end of this June, thanks to a big effort between NIH and the FDA.
And I want to give a shout out to Randy Hubach and others here at Purdue who are also working on outreach. You need to have an actual medication that works. You need to have a diagnostic test that helps you find the people who need the medication that works. You need to have a payment system that actually allows you to get the medication that works. But you also need to have outreach to those communities who are at highest risk. And we know that trust, you can do everything else right, but if you don't have that trust, if you don't have that engagement, if you don't have that relationship, then you're still not going to be able to cure the people who need cures. So I want to recognize Angie and Randy and folks who are out there in the community on the front lines, creating those relationships that will allow the innovation to become reality.
Really important point. It's not enough to say, I hope this isn't the battery dying. It's not enough to say that we're going to make the drugs available. They still have to have a healthcare delivery system that makes it actually happen. I asked the Harvard economist to tell me if we manage to do this program, which we could launch this year, in over 5 years, find as many of those people as possible, what would it mean to Indiana? So he did the math real quick. There would be 430 lives saved by this effort, people who would not die of liver disease, who otherwise are going to, people like my brother-in-law. We would save on the neighborhood of $30 million for the Indiana government because of all the fees that you won't be having to pay into your Medicaid program for people who ended up with terrible outcomes. You would also prevent hundreds of cases of diabetes and kidney disease because you can prevent that by treating the hepatitis now and avoiding the inflammatory consequences that have all of these other issues. You might even stop 100 or so cases downstream of Alzheimer's disease because there's a link there as well. There's so many compelling reasons. So we just got to get this to happen. Right now, there's bipartisan support in the Congress. It's being led.
What can we do? What can the audience do to help you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I will say, one of your senators, Senator Todd Young, is a big supporter of this, volunteering to co-sponsor the bill. The legislative language is within a few days of being finalized, being led by Senator Bill Cassidy, who happens to be a liver doctor from Louisiana, and Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland. And I think with that language, people are going to start to say, okay, it's time to sign up on this. And then we just have to figure out a way to actually get it voted upon and passed. So if you have connections with anybody in the House or the Senate, this would be a great time to use it. Tell them that you want to see action done about hepatitis C, that you want
And in case you didn't know, all of you have connections because all of you have a representative who goes to Congress. And so pick up the phone, call, tell them that you care about the opportunity we have to cure. Tell them you just heard from Francis Collins today. And he said, we can cure hepatitis C in our community if you all will pass the bill and provide the funding. And it will save Indiana money in the long run and in the short run. All of you have a connection.
Exactly right. Don't be shy. This is time to save lives and save money. What is not to love about this? If we can't do this, America, for something where the answer is so clear in front of us, then I don't know what we can do. This is one of those circumstances that we can't allow to go by. By the way, Australia has already done this. The country of Egypt has already done this. Rwanda is way ahead of us on this. The UK has got a program underway. Do we want to be last with all of our resources to deal with something like this, to save lives and save money?
The VA's already done this.
The VA has already done this because they got their own separate funding to do so, and they were incredibly successful at it. So this is entirely achievable. This is not some pipe dream. It's not like, well, we hope we can invent something that's going to help. It's been invented. We just have to get it to the people who need it.
So Marla, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do.
All right, please, go ahead.
Dr. Collins, if you were still director at the NIH, what innovative new strategies would you propose to bridge the persistent gaps in health equity, particularly in underserved communities?
A great question. Well, the person who is the director of NIH, Dr. Monica Bertagnolli, if she were here, would love that question as well, because this is her main passion, is how are we going to do something to bridge that gap? Now, keep in mind, NIH is a research organization. NIH can influence how healthcare gets delivered by running trials that basically show what can work, but we can't necessarily decide to tell the healthcare system how to change its approach. We just have to provide the data to convince people that this is the right thing to do. So a big push from Dr. Bertagnolli is going to be in the clinical trial system, and particularly in reaching out to communities in a way that makes it much easier for diverse participants to take part in trials. So much of the way we run trials, we were talking about this last night, is we expect people to take time off from work to get on a bus or a car or a train and come to us because that's how we do things. And you have to show up in our clinic at appointment time that we give you. And that's just not going to work for a lot of people who have too many other constraints. So we should be going to them. We should figure out how to do this in a convenient way. And that means moving trials from where many of them are in the major academic centers out into community hospitals and clinics, and also using such things as telehealth to allow people to enroll who maybe don't have to show up at all and can all be done remotely. We did a bit of this with some of the COVID diagnostic tests, and it actually worked really well. So we got to get out of our mindset here as academics that, you know, we're in charge and everybody has to come to us, otherwise we can't do the work. That would be a big part of it. I think she would also be one to endorse a program I want to mention, which is from the Common Fund. The Common Fund is the part of the NIH budget which doesn't attach itself to one of those 27 institutes or centers. It's basically something that can be done that doesn't really fit a specific agenda, but it's good for everybody. And there's a Common Fund project called COMPASS. Maybe you should look at that and see, because it's ongoing right now. COMPASS stands for Community Partnership for Advancing Science to Society. The goal here is all about trying to deal with health disparities. And you know, we've done a lot of research on health disparities, but frankly, as I looked at that when I was director, a lot of it seemed to be just admiring the problem and not actually trying to do something in terms of interventions. The projects in COMPASS are all interventions. They're all efforts to try to look at structural things that could be done to try to address health disparities in terms of how people have access to care, in terms of things like food deserts. It's not just about disease, but also about health. All the things that are on your slide that are part of that 80% that contribute to health disparities. We are interested in that too, not just the part that works through a clinic or a doctor. There's $171 million, if I remember right, that's now assigned to COMPASS. A whole bunch of awards have been made, but I think there's more to come. I think that's going to be a really interesting place to see how some creative ideas that are not just descriptive, not just observational, they're interventional, might actually give us ideas about how to do this better, because the current situation is just unacceptable.
Well, and I think that's important for the audience to hear. It's one thing to do research on disparities where you're uncovering disparities, and you need that because you need to understand the problem before you can address the problem. But when we talk about the Health First funding, when we talk about our partnership with NCHS, it is important that we are studying the intervention so that we can go back to the legislature and say, not only is there a problem, but there's a specific intervention that we know that works to address that problem, and that's why you should fund it, because that's where the rubber meets the road from policymakers. They'll say, yeah, black women are dying from infant mortality, but there's no evidence that says that if we spend money on X, Y, or Z, that it's actually going to change the issue. Well, yes, there is. We have it, and it's from Purdue University. You know, that's what we need to do, and so I'm so glad you brought that up. Marla, I think we have time for just a few more questions. Do you have a couple more?
Yes, we do. How can we speed up large clinical trials or efforts, such as was the case for COVID-19, for epidemics that are slower acting, such as obesity and diabetics?
Yeah, another great question about trials. And again, we have to get over our sort of historical tendencies that, oh, we do it this way, and that's the way we've always done it, and so that's the way we should always do it. There's a lot of steps built into the design and the implementation and the conduct of a clinical trial that take a lot longer than they really need to. And that's something that NIH is deeply attached to trying to fix. The whole review process, it tends to take at least a year from the time somebody has proposed a clinical trial until it's gone through its 2 steps of review and then finally gets funded. That is not a model that I think is appropriate for the urgency of getting answers, even if, as you say in the question, it's not an epidemic, but it's something like obesity or diabetes. We need those answers. Something to watch, you all, would be some new ideas that are coming forward from the latest partner in government funding of research, which is ARPA-H. Do you all know about ARPA-H? So ARPA stands for Advanced Research Project Agency. Way back in 3 or 4 decades ago, there was an agency of that sort that was founded in the Department of Defense called DARPA, and DARPA continues to be a very exciting area for defense research right now. And DARPA did a few interesting things like the internet and GPS, and so they had some pretty good successes. They also had a lot of failures because they were very much in this, let's move fast, let's take a lot of risks, let's kill things quickly when they fail. Kind of like you'd expect for a venture capital space. We haven't quite had that ability with biomedical research to run things that way, but ARPA-H is now set up to do so. I had a chance when I was at the White House to help shape this and to recruit the director, Renee Wegerson, who came out of a biotech company in Boston called Ginkgo Bioworks, but was previously for 10 years a staff member at DARPA. So she knows sort of the attitude, and it's a different attitude. It's like not going to worry so much about those 2 levels of peer review and not going to worry so much about, okay, here's a company that has expertise that would never write a grant to NIH, but we're going to give them some money with these no-go decisions and see what they can do. So they can build projects led by project managers that can go very quick. They're very interested in this space of what to do about clinical trials and speeding them up and making them more efficient. There's a whole program called Paradigm, you can look that up, that just got announced about a month ago, that is basically trying to turn mobile units into a very powerful place to do a lot of clinical trial enrollment. And I know there's people here that are interested in that as well. So watch that. It's a nice alternative to NIH's way of doing things, which is sort of required of them by the Congress, but which sometimes seems like it's more slow and ponderous than it should be.
I want to ask you how NIH comes up with all these acronyms and names for projects, but we don't have time for that. Marlo, I got time for one more question.
Dr. Collins, how do you address the critique that most health equity research is descriptive and lacks addressable causal evidence, limiting the effectiveness of interventions designed to reduce disparities?
Well, that relates to what I was talking about a minute ago with Compass, which is designed to address exactly that, that this is not just descriptive, this is very specific interventions that are well controlled, and so you can see whether that intervention actually had a benefit in terms of improving outcomes. I think the criticism was fair. I kind of agreed with it, and that's one of the reasons you've seen NIH change its direction. We know a lot already about health inequity. We know a lot about health disparities in terms of what the causes are. We have not nearly enough data on what interventions might change that. And that, I think, is a good place for us to really work. And by the way, I got to say, since we're here on this topic in front of this audience, a big part of that is going to be for us to continue our efforts to diversify our own workforce. Because it clearly, yes, clearly makes a difference in terms of the likelihood of people being interested in participating in studies like this sort. If it's clear that the people running the studies have some diversity themselves, that's well documented. It makes me really crazy when people start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion like, well, that's nice to have. No, for science, it's essential to have if you want to actually get results that are meaningful and trustworthy and happen quickly, the evidence that diverse teams are more creative, more productive, is overwhelming. This is not just, well, we ought to do it. If we're not doing it, we're basically not doing our jobs in terms of doing the best possible science. So when somebody comes at you about this, please push back and say, there is evidence here that diversity in everything we do is absolutely essential for our success and for your success, taxpayers. So you want us to diversify our workforce. You want us to diversify our clinical trial participants. You want all of these things to be representative of the amazing breadth of innovative ideas that don't all come from the majority population. Keep telling them that.
So fun question since we started off with Taylor Swift. Do you have a favorite musician or favorite song?
Well, I am a fan of James Taylor.
I do like some James Taylor. I can jive with that.
Yeah, you've got a friend.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Hey, and I can't think of a better note to end on. Can we give Dr. Collins a round of applause? My friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Collins, for those amazing insights. I think everyone here probably learned something today. Definitely learned something today. Always interesting to see the behind the scenes on those big federal efforts that impact all of us. We're going to take a short break now. Get up, stretch your legs, use the restroom, get something to drink. We'll be back and reconvene at 11:10. Thank you.
Dr. Soto serves as Director of All In for Health and Chief Diversity Officer at the Indiana Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. She is also an Associate Professor of Medicine and serves as Vice Chair for Diversity, Health Equity, and Inclusion, and Vice Chair for Faculty Affairs and Professional Development in the Department of Medicine at IU School of Medicine. And her scholarship and research center on equity or inequity of higher education and academic medicine. And Mary Witira engages data, conversations, and people to explore possibilities of change and nurture progressive initiatives at Notre Dame University, at the University of Notre Dame, excuse me. She enjoys working at the intersections, particularly of health, society, and education. Great, welcome. So I'm going to do a very, very brief overview of the Indiana CTSI and then hand it off to this esteemed panel. So and I don't know if I'm supposed to, here. Very good. There we go. So the Indiana Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute is a partnership of Indiana University, Purdue University, the University of Notre Dame, and the Regan Street Institute. And our mission is to bring together Indiana's brightest minds to solve the state's most pressing health challenges. Sharon Moe and I co-direct the CTSI along with deputy directors at each of our partner campuses. Perhaps more importantly, we have navigators at each campus, and those here at Purdue University are Natasha Nicolaitis and Tommy Soares. These are very knowledgeable and connected individuals who can help investigators identify services and resources and collaborators for the research. Hopefully you all know them already. The Indiana CTSI is part of a national network of CTSA hubs. There are over 60 of them across the country that are funded by NIH. And they have identified 6 areas of emphasis, including on health disparities. The goal of both the Indiana Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute and the other CTSA hubs is to provide infrastructure for translational research and national connectivity to promote program impact. The NIH invested in translational research infrastructure, really to speed the translation of science into improved health. And I might add now, health equity. So in our most recent renewal, which started in May of 2023, Indiana embraced the focus on health equity with a vision statement as follows. In 2030, at the end of the 7-year renewal period, we envision Indiana CTSI will transform our statewide research ecosystem with deliberate attention to diversity and inclusion in our partnerships, workforce development, and research engagement. We will accelerate innovation and rapidly implement evidence into practice in order to advance health equity. So it's really at the core of what we do. And specifically, in order to advance health equity, the Indiana CTSI listens, engages with, and convenes researchers, our partners, and stakeholders with lived experience, coordinates to address the prioritized needs of the community, and catalyzes collaborative activity through resources, pilot funding, and most importantly, our people, to offer bidirectional value and health impact in the communities we seek to serve. Once again, our navigators at each campus serve as an initial point of contact for investigators, connecting them to CTSI collaborators and resources across all campuses. These resources, including pilot funding and expertise, are organized into these pillars such as workforce development, community engagement, informatics, and clinical research, and cross-cutting initiatives focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the Monon Collaborative expansion. The bottom line is that your success is our success, so please reach out if we can be of service. And finally, the Monon Collaborative expansion, which is core to our next 7-year renewal period, is an Indiana CTSI initiative that over the next 7 years proposes to convene, coordinate, collaborate, and catalyze community-engaged translational research with a focus on various regions across the state. The rationale that we made to NIH was that Indiana is a microcosm of the US, but as we all know, there's tremendous variability across the regions in our state. So we're starting in 2 very different regions of our state, regions 1 and 7, with ongoing engagement in these counties already by Connections in Health and increased outreach activities with All In for Health. We plan to build on this engaged approach with workforce development, clinical research, and health informatics related to services and activities that we do. Our work will be supported by the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, trustworthiness, and of course, community engagement. Our goal is to advance health equity region by region over the next 7 years. Please let us know if you'd like to join us in these efforts. Your success is our success, and if you can read the email down there, you're welcome to reach out to us or contact any one of us that are part of the CTSI. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm an assistant professor of public health and biomedical engineering. My name is Natalia. Hello. I'm a biomedical engineer by training who found and fell in love with public health on a journey to create health technologies to advance health equity. I'm here representing my lab, which is the Health Equity Lab here at Purdue. We are a highly interdisciplinary group working to design and implement health technologies for communities who most need them. So we focus on human-centered design approaches. We work to understand context-specific needs and use those to inform appropriate design specifications for health technologies. And then we also engage communities in medically underserved areas in translational science to inform how we then go about implementing those technologies in ways that make them ultimately become adopted, and also in ways that get them used to advance health equity as opposed to exacerbating disparities, as we know is the case with many novel technologies. So we have a number of projects and collaborations with engineers here at Purdue for various technologies with a focus on rapid diagnostic tests. We have projects on HPV, HIV, Hep C, many of which we heard about the importance of today. And through these different projects, we've learned a ton, some of which I'd like to share some of these lessons with you all today, and we continue to learn. But first and foremost, I think the lesson that drives the core work of our lab is that without meaningful engagement, even the most innovative technologies will fall through the gap. And by the gap, I mean this translational gap you see on the screen. This refers to the routine failure of the bench to bedside or bench to human process that many engineers and technology developers, myself included, have experienced in various ways, and particularly when trying to move technological innovation out of the lab into the people who most need them. So I'm going to share that story that started all of this work for me. My PhD in biomedical engineering was focused on the development of a rapid test for HPV. And this is the virus that causes cervical cancer. And so this was meant to increase access to screening in medically underserved communities. This was a low-cost test, it was easy to use, and it kind of checked all the boxes for the WHO's it's hidden here, but the WHO's criteria for a cervical cancer screening test. They needed it to detect high-risk HPV DNA, to do so in the absence of laboratory infrastructure, so something you could take out to the field, and something that was quick, that we could go from sample to result in less than an hour. So this test checked those boxes, and we were confident that it could be a game changer for cervical cancer screening. But after many years and lots of resources to bring this test to fruition, I learned the hard way that its uptake and adoption require much more than technical rigor, and that its intended impact on health equity was something technology alone would never be able to achieve. I learned this, and just about everything else I know, from a Latino migrant farm worker community in South Florida, where we had identified an excess burden of cervical cancer mortality and late-stage diagnosis. Because this population was low income and uninsured and migrant, so they also moved around a lot and were hard to reach, we felt that it made sense they were underscreened and that this test could really be the solution. We could screen them out in the community, we could give them their results right away, it would be quick and cheap and easy and all the things that I assumed this test needed to be. We heard about blind spots earlier, we had tons of them. We were really unprepared for the profound social and cultural barriers to screening that not only would our technology ever be able to address, but that would impede its adoption at all. So I ended up going back to this community after going back to school and learning public health, and engaging them in participatory research, where they, as the experts in their lived experience, would be part of co-designing solutions that worked for them in their actual context. And this was where I first learned about community health workers. I work with many of you in many different capacities in community health workforce development. And this is really where that all started. These were members of the community, usually women, who were well known and trusted and served as a link between the community and the health system. Together, we explored different interventions like vaginal self-sampling that was far more acceptable to these women than a traditional pap smear, which is the traditional way to screen for cervical cancer. And so together, as a community and our academic partners, we proposed to train these community health workers to provide education and outreach on cervical cancer screening, to teach women to take their own sample, and then ultimately to run and deliver that rapid test that we were developing, which also helped inform its usability and how we needed to redesign it according to that target end user group. So this work was funded by the NIH, and it was allowed me to start my lab here at Purdue at the intersection of biomedical engineering and public health. I share this story because I think there's a lot of us here at Purdue making brilliant discoveries and inventions in the lab and really thinking about how to translate them. And I know for many engineers that the idea of engaging a community meaningfully can seem a little daunting and time-consuming and potentially outside the scope of what our technology development grants have historically been allowed for. So I'd like to offer some tips, and I thought I'd share some recent work in my lab engaging a brand new community when I first moved here to Indiana. This organization is about 5 minutes from campus. Many of you have heard of or engaged with them in some way. Lafayette Transitional Housing Center is a local homeless shelter doing phenomenal work to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness here. At the start of the pandemic, they were really struggling to figure out how to keep this population safe. They were living in congregate settings. They couldn't follow stay-at-home guidance. They had no homes. And they had very limited access to reliable information and testing and vaccinations. So I thought many of the strategies that we were employing for cervical cancer would be relevant here and applicable and could serve as a starting point for pandemic response in homeless shelters. And the lesson on this slide is authentic engagement isn't easy, but it is necessary. I was coming in as an outsider to this community. I was brand new to Indiana. It was right at the beginning of COVID. I have no lived experience of homelessness. I couldn't even begin to relate to their daily struggles. But this ecosystem has provided the resources and the know-how and the expertise that you'll hear about on this panel to begin to engage in this work by showing up and building trust and really listening. It did become possible to identify research questions of mutual interest and benefit to the community. So I'd like to highlight just at the bottom of the screen the CTSI resource, the Community Health Partnerships Trailblazer Award, that is designed to foster those new community academic partnerships and that really helped get this work started. So I encourage you, if you're curious, to take a look at those. And sure enough, we learned that if you build it, they will come. We created a community academic partnership focused on homelessness and health disparities that brought together multi-sectoral partners all over the area, from homeless service providers to healthcare providers, and a number of different units at Purdue. So public health, nursing, pharmacy, nutrition, and hospitality all got involved. And this established partnership, we continue to meet weekly, we've done so for 4 years, has just expanded the scope of what we've been able to achieve with this community. It's also led to new and exciting projects and opened doors to funding for new research avenues. So I want to highlight 2 major grants supporting this work that I think demonstrate the growing commitment to community engagement from our federal funding. One is the RADXUP initiative, or NIH Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics for Underserved Populations. This provided funding for us and our community partners to together assess the impact of shelter-based rapid testing for COVID. And then we were also recently awarded the NIH Director's New Innovator Award, so thank you, Dr. Collins, for whatever role you had in that. This is to address cervical cancer disparities among people experiencing homelessness, which in my last minute or so I'd like to tell you about as I share some final takeaways. I'm really particularly excited about this work because I think it exemplifies the importance of interdisciplinary team science. Cervical cancer mortality and incidence rates are 4 times higher among people experiencing homelessness than our national averages. And in order to begin to address and chip away at this, we really have to think about a number of things. So we have to understand their lived experience, their practices, and what are specifically their barriers to screening. We then need to design interventions that make sure we increase their knowledge and awareness of existing resources for screening. There are free CDC funded programs for breast and cervical cancer for low-income women that people are completely unaware of in the community. We also are implementing and assessing interventions to increase the uptake of screening. These include HPV self-sampling and rapid testing. We have to ensure linkage to follow-up care for those who test positive. And then we also want to leverage whatever works from this as a model for preventive healthcare delivery more broadly, even beyond cervical cancer. So all of this work will require a lot of different disciplines and minds at the table. So we're excited to partner with, obviously, public health, but we also have partners in anthropology, nursing, pharmacy, biomedical engineering, laboratory sciences, and clinical medicine. So this is really, I think, an exciting example of team science. And the final lesson I'd like to offer is that I think true partnership really enables scale up and broader impact. I think because of our successes here in Lafayette, we've been contacted by a number of organizations throughout Indiana, and this has allowed us to expand this work to Indianapolis and really scale up our programmatic interventions, which I believe can ultimately lead to broader impact. I want to just highlight Research Jam, which is another resource of the CTSI. They're a human-centered design firm, that can help folks think about how to begin to engage diverse stakeholders in the design of technologies or interventions in general. And also Purdue's Center for Health Equity and Innovation, CHECI, that has really facilitated a lot of these connections for us in Indianapolis. So I'd like to just end by saying that I think, I really believe health equity is possible with authentic human partnership and community partnership, and it will require committed resources, but they are out there. You'll hear about them now and ripe for the taking. So I invite you all to connect with us, and thank you very much.
It was me. Let me start by saying probably the most problematic thing that I will say today. I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. And I just started listening to country music because of Beyonce. Okay. Buenos dias. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It is a privilege to be amongst an all-women scientist panel, speaking to all of you today. It is also very important for me to thank Purdue University and the faculty here that stood up, especially this past month, defending faculty rights, and by doing so, also protecting diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations in the state of Indiana. I do not have many disclosures, except that I am an equity scholar. And everything that I say, and you will see, is in reference to that equity aspect. I will combine a couple of talks today in the sense that I want to speak to you a little bit about All In for Health as an initiative of the Indiana CTSI. And then I will follow up with one of our most recent health equity related studies that involves trust and trustworthiness. And I hope that Dr. Collins can also communicate that at a national level of the importance of trust in biomedical research and where we are today. So as my introduction stated, I am director of All In for Health. It is an initiative by the Indiana CTSI, and I will focus on the fact that it does public engagement in understanding the role and value of health research and partners with researchers. As part of our commitment to community engagement and the public and all the Indiana residents, we really have a mission to provide a voice for the public where they can actually talk about their health research and research priorities, as well as receiving health research information and connecting to health research resources. So it is very vast, and I will tell you a little bit more about the composition of All In for Health. In terms of what we provide for you all as researchers, perhaps, here, we promote your research opportunities through our several platforms. It helps gain public perspective and connects individuals to the Volunteer Research Registry. Our Volunteer Research Registry for the state of Indiana is about 15,000 participants, and they are representative of each of the 92 counties in the state. In addition to that, we have a budding, very actually active social media and engaged individuals. There's over 30,000 people that are part of All In for Health, either through, again, social media or our newsletters. I hate to pick on Dr. Collins, but Dr. Collins, there's a card on your table that says All In. Do you mind standing up and maybe, yeah. Thank you. So some of those cards are in each of your tables, and I really encourage you to join All In for Health. I promise you that you will get a lot of really good information, but it will also show you the value for the state of Indiana and for our research community. In addition to that, let's see here. Did it move? Okay. In addition to that, we have been focusing on trust. And let me tell you how I came across this particular aspect. I've been doing research ethics, the intersection of research ethics and health equity for over 20 years in academic medicine. And one of the things that, when I found out that I would be involved in the volunteer research registry, especially after the COVID, there's no such thing, but you know what I meant, during the COVID pandemic, was, do they even trust us? Where are we at that? And we know by the Pew report that trust in science has greatly declined, really as a function of misinformation and disinformation campaigns. So we wanted to ask exactly the trust that those 15,000 individuals had in biomedical research. So one of the aspects of this work is that we believe trust influences individual experiences and health outcomes and should be considered in the public discourse. The more distrust in patient providers or distrust in community and researchers, the more health disparities exist. Trust enables acceptance of evolving science. It accepts that science evolves. It also allows acceptance of our public health measures and interventions and mitigates health consequences of social disparities. So I want to tell you a little bit about the trust study by the All In for Health team. So we actually combined 3 trust scales into a survey, and we had over 660 participants in the state of Indiana being part of this study. I am highlighting here just a few of those results. Again, keep in mind that these are individuals that signed up voluntarily to be part of research, that believed in Purdue University, IU School of Medicine, IU Bloomington, Notre Dame, and Regan Street Institute, which are all part of the Indiana CTSI. You can see how 50% of individuals disagree that patients get the same medical treatment regardless of their race and ethnicity. 67% think it is safe to participate in medical research, yet 79% had never been asked to be part of research. 30% think that medical researchers act differently toward minoritized participants. 10% believe that medical researchers select minorities for the most dangerous studies, and some medical research, and 10% also believe that some medical research projects are secretly designed to expose minoritized groups to diseases. I didn't tell you when we conducted this study. I neglected that. And it was just in 2022, okay? And even though the 10% seems a very low number, I hope that you all agree with us, that is a very alarming number. We went a little bit further and looked at the disparities and opinions in regards to some of these, and I just offer, again, just briefly some of these comments where we actually aggregated Black and Latino populations into this historically marginalized group category and compare it to our majority of participants. And you can see the statistically significance of it is safe to be in a medical research study. Again, the question about most medical researchers would not lie to have people try to participate in studies, and some medical research projects are secretly designed to expose minoritized populations to diseases. There's a couple more that I want to share with you. To get people to take part in a study, medical researchers usually do not explain all of the dangers about participation. Medical researchers act differently, and patients get the same treatment. You can see that data there. Some of the lessons, I actually encourage all of us, for those of us that are faculty, to stop being so much of theorists and actually engage in the practice. We need to be more practitioners. And some of the lessons here is, again, historically marginalized participants are willing to participate. Stop the narrative. I just realized this is really a good soapbox. Okay, sorry. let's ask them to participate. We need to speak against misinformation and disinformation, right? That we know what is happening outside of our campuses. We are the experts on the topic. Let's show up more often to the legislation. We need to be more transparent and explicit about what we're doing. We need to have researchers and health systems to partner in the recruitment of individuals into clinical trials, especially because for many of our populations in Indiana, not only in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but thinking about the largely rural population, participation in clinical trials such as the ones that might be under All In for Health is the only way that they actually get cutting edge health access. And then work again with researchers on the dissemination to the public. I don't know if your grandmother reads your journal articles, but mine doesn't. So in that aspect, again, we need to really communicate our science to the public in much better ways and not stop in the research article. So I will stop there. I would love to enjoy a little bit of Q&A, and I will pass the baton here, Mary.
I think following on the thread of interdisciplinary interest, I'd like to take us through the health equity research work that is happening within the Health Equity Data Lab. And perhaps before going into that, mention that I'm actually trained as a biochemist and then as a peace builder. So I always find myself in the intersections of trying to build the trust for the communities towards science, and currently taking another course in public health. The Health Equity Data Lab sits within the Lucy Family Institute at the University of Notre Dame and seeks to look at the interdisciplinary research happening within the university and amongst our partners and translate that at the intersections of health equity, data science, and AI, with an aspect of ensuring that there's a collaborative process between the university and the community. And our model seeks to look at what does the individual need in terms of knowledge, attitude, and skills, all the way to public policy and national engagements. So it's both bottom-up, top-down kind of reflection when it comes to the work that we do. And our ideation takes process a lot within the Health Equity Data Forum that happens twice a year and has additional conversations and engagements. So the lab is about 7 months today. 7 months in, I got in last year, and the focus has been continually on the social determinants of health. I will not belabor this, given that different speakers have highlighted this in the course of the day, and works through 4 different pillars, one being precision social determinants of health, the Health Equity Data Index that is seeking to understand what are we measuring in health equity, why do we need to measure it, and what does it look like across the United States. And then the beyond human resources, beginning to understand where do our workers come from, the different employees that we have, what resources do they need in the communities that they come from, and what works in those spaces. So ideally asking what interventions work when they come into the workspaces and why do they work. And then the health workforce of the future and responsible AI. AI is right now a conversation that we're beginning to ask about what does accountability look like in the languages that we have and the trainings that we do when it comes to reproducing, whether it's the bias and the stereotypes that do exist with the current health system. And in those pillars, the conversations end up becoming working groups that focus on different issues, and I'll highlight one that I'm currently involved in. That's the Black Maternal Health Initiative. And right now, it's more maternal health initiative, which is engaging the voice of the payer, the provider, and the community health workers and community-based organizations to begin to understand across Indiana, where are the food deserts? What resources are needed to provide those resources? And this is an interesting conversation because we do have not only the payer beginning to say we can pay for some of the services, and in this case being like a nutritional conversation, and the provider saying we can provide for, whether it's the food benefit or the food resource. But then there are other questions that come into play in terms of once the food benefit is provided, or the resource is provided on the information, how do the mothers or expectant women going through this process access that food? So those are some of the conversations and questions that we're beginning to ask as we build this form of intervention. We have the food as medicine. I know earlier in the morning it was highlighted, maybe the conversation needs to shift to food as health. We are currently holding it as food as medicine, given the conversations that we are having revolve around understanding that. And then finally, we have the workforce of the future, responsible AI, seeking to understand what are we predicting, how are we predicting it, what does interoperability look like amongst those different systems. We also do health research incubation, and this is more to allow the partnership between Indiana University, University of Notre Dame to work on interdisciplinary research. And some of the projects that are happening at the moment is we have an indigenous cancer disparities, which really will look at the social network analysis of how people journey through, whether it's through cancer and the resources. This specifically looks at the indigenous population. We do have the emergency room usage and hospitalization study, a partnership between the local health system in St. Joe County and the University of Notre Dame, as well as the motels for now. And this specifically looks to understand if healthcare is provided to people who are in transition when it comes to housing, does that reduce the emergency room usage or hospitalization rates for them? And we do have the other project is bridging the data gap between parental adversity and social determinants of health outcomes for those families. And this seeks to understand the different parents and their infants and the social determinants of health that they do have. Sort of, do we understand what needs that they have, and how do we submit and provide for those resources? We have the housing, health, equity nexus, and I'll go through just the next two in the interest of time. And the health, house, equity nexus really is looking more into the climate change conversation, and it's a partnership between the University of Notre Dame and the near Northwest neighborhood within the county, again, seeking to understand how do we predict of climate health risks, and does the community know what to look out for, how to work around this, what resources to look out for within the ecosystem. We do have two projects, one focusing on responsible use of artificial intelligence and empowering the workforce of the future, a conversation that we've had a lot about today. And that one looks at more of the models and how they can effectively contribute to change. And the next one looks more towards like developing an AI-based application for skin diagnosis that is more inclusive and allows for privacy and diversity in their data. The other three different projects are still ongoing and emerging, looking at whether it's reducing mortality from illicit drugs in South Bend or how artificial intelligence can inform air quality and incentives for environmental justice. This is particularly a project between Illinois and Indiana, and sort of looking at what does state responsibility look like, particularly in a conversation that seeks to continually push for polluter pays, but then you have two state boundaries, like at the state boundary, who pays when there is such a scenario. So as I wrap up, earlier in the month, the Senate Finance Committee for Health, or rather was looking at the conversation on AI for health, and the question that they had was, how do we build accountability in the systems that we do have around AI? But then beyond building accountability, can we reproduce what they do tell us today? And one of the conversations that emerged a lot from that is that there is need to continually know that if we are working on the current health system, we would be reproducing the very same system inequalities that we do have. And so a bigger challenge to us as we continually think about the future and want to build the future is to know that in some cases, we might need to completely get away from what is existing and begin re-envisioning a new future. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been another amazing panel. I think we have time for a few questions. Do we have any questions?
Yes. We have one question for Dr. Rodriguez. Can you share some specific examples of the health services or interventions implemented or provided for the homeless populations during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Hello, can you hear me? Sure, thank you for the question. So we started by training community health workers to provide health education, health assessments. In this population, they had very little information or very little reliable information about what was happening with the pandemic, and the CDC posters at the time, or even our State Department of Health posters, all said, like, stay at home, which was not super helpful if you were homeless. We started by doing things that mattered to them, like helping them get their stimulus checks. They didn't have bank accounts, they didn't have a mailing address, they don't pay taxes, and so figuring out how to do that was their priority. And in doing so, that built a lot of trust that then translated to, going to our community health workers to say, hey, should I get this vaccine that just came out? They're coming to offer it. What do you think? Is there a government chip in it? Like, all these questions that would come up. And so I think it was a really successful model because we started by asking, what do you want? And then, so from there, the community health workers also did rapid testing, helped coordinate vaccine clinics, navigated people to care, you name it.
Okay. Well,
I have a question for the panelists. I know I'm not supposed to, but I'm the director of Health Equity. I can do this. I would just love each of you to just comment on what government and or universities could be doing to help you in your work, because you literally have both government and university leaders here. So now's your chance. Tell us what you need, what we can do to help you all out in your work.
We were eager.
Sometimes when asked a question, as a peace builder, I reflect on the monopoly of governance in choosing to push resources to where their interests are. And at this juncture, I would call the government to look at health as their interest, not just politics. And health and politics go hand in hand, I believe that. But it's important that governments look at healthcare as a critical, I'll say public good, even though I know that's questionable, but health in itself is a public good that the government ought to put not only resources, conversations, understanding and awareness towards, but they also need to continually uphold as an interest. Thank you.
I fully agree with my colleague here. You said go for it. I'm going to go for it. I don't go here. That was the statement. But, I think just a few days ago was a perfect example of government overreaching into the mission of higher education. And I think also the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with conversations around structural racism, critical theories, and the list goes on and on, has been truly a disinformation and misinformation campaign, and not recognizing the impact that it has on health equity is truly a shame, especially in the state of Indiana when we're really talking about rural health, when we're talking about access, when we're talking, and the list goes on, especially also when we're 47th and 40th, and you keep going down the list of health concerns. So we want to be funded to do the work, and I think that takes it away again from let's not politicize health equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're all working towards the same goal. And I have more to say after this.
I would just add that nothing about us without us, I think, is the statement. And I was really encouraged by the recent Compass Awards and others, where the funds are going directly to the community, and the communities are really leading those applications. And I think across the CTSI, and Jerome, also with what you're leading, a lot of the support is going directly to the community with such an emphasis on sustainability. I feel like we just need to open the floodgates in that arena and start by listening and empowerment, so that the work that we do arm in arm is sustained.
I couldn't have said it better. I was just going to add, let the community lead. So I think I agree, these funding initiatives and also just what drives our research questions to begin with should be led by the community, especially if we're talking a big game about being land grant and all that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, and that brings us to lunch. So the PMU staff has set up 2 buffet tables in the back. To keep some order around this, we're gonna allow them to come around tables and release table by table. So we ask you to please remain seated until your table is released, so we don't end up with everybody all in one line. The buffets will be taken down at 1 o'clock, so if you would like to have some lunch, please make sure you do find your way into a line before 1 o'clock. So with that, we'll go ahead and break. Thank you.